Hi there, my name is Stephen Chu, and I'm a professor of psychology. I'm here to talk to you about the superpowers of psychology majors. So this video is for students who are interested in psychology. Perhaps you're already a psych major or a psych minor, but it's also for students who think they might be interested in psychology. Perhaps you are considering taking general psychology in college or AP psychology in high school. This video is going to talk about the advantages of being a psych major in terms of what you learn and the value of what you learn. So before we get to the superpowers, though, of psychology majors, let's talk about common misperceptions that students have about what psychology is about. If you are a psychology major, you're probably going to hear three common misconceptions about what the major covers. Number one, it's just common sense. People think often that psychology majors just learn things that everyday people already know. Well, actually, a lot of what you learn in psychology is counterintuitive. It goes against what people believe, because a lot of times people believe things that aren't necessarily true. And it really undermines their ability to make good decisions or to behave effectively in different situations. In psychology, we learn about the research which tells us what truly is really the optimal and best way of learning. And we also learn about the traps and pitfalls to avoid. The second thing you learn is that psychology is all about analyzing people. Well, actually, analyzing people is what everyone does, whether they're a psychology major or not. They're constantly trying to figure out, like, what's the motivation for someone doing this or saying this, or what's my own motivation for feeling the way I feel. Psychology goes beyond that. We try to understand people. We understand what are the common motivations are, the common traits of behaviors. So once you understand people, actually you can anticipate how they might respond, and you can design actions that you are more confident that are going to be effective in what it is you're trying to do. Then the third one is probably the biggest misconception of all. You can't get a job with that major. So you hear this a lot about, like, oh, psych major, well, it's fun, but maybe you can't get a job with that. And you hear this in relation to majors like nursing or accounting or engineering, where there's a clear undergraduate path. For most psychology careers, you have to go to graduate school. You have to get some graduate training of some sort. But that doesn't mean that you don't develop good, marketable, employable skills as an undergraduate psychology major. If you actually look at the most common and desired skills among employers, what you find is it's not related to knowledge in a domain at all. It's not about accounting or nursing or engineering. It's about these skills that you have that's not really linked to any particular major. So number one, and this has been true for a number of years, is critical thinking, the ability to make good decisions, to weigh evidence, to reason effectively, to avoid pitfalls in thinking. That is really the number one critical skill. Number two is teamwork and collaboration, the ability to work with a group, to sort of create a group that optimizes people's strengths and minimizes weaknesses, to lead the group, to persuade the group. That's number two. Professionalism and work ethic, your ability to solve problems on the job, to work through difficult, challenging situations and problems. And then the last one is oral and written communication, the ability to write and speak effectively and clearly, and to convey your meaning unambiguously. So if you develop those four skills as part of whatever major you have, then you're going to have valuable skills to offer employers. So let's keep in mind what those skills are, and we'll come back and visit this after we talk about the superpowers of psychology majors. All right. So the point of this video is that psychology majors possess certain superpowers. Now, I'm not talking about like super strength or X-ray vision here. What I mean by a superpower is that psychology majors develop valuable skills and knowledge simply as part of their major. And these are skills and knowledge that students in other majors don't get. And these are very valuable and useful for success both in college and in careers. People will spend money and will seek out these other skills outside of their major because they're so valuable. But as psychology majors, you develop these skills just simply in the course of taking your required coursework. So let's talk about what those might be. What are the superpowers of psychology majors? I'm going to outline 6 of these quote unquote superpowers that I think are particularly noteworthy. Okay, number 1 is that you know how to learn effectively. This sounds kind of strange because, of course, we've been learning since we were in kindergarten and elementary school. But the research is quite clear that most people actually use the least effective learning strategies. This is true with a lot of students. Students tend to pick learning strategies that are easy to do, like mindlessly rereading material or trying to study in the midst of distractions of checking social media or checking, going through their phone and things like that. They pick them because they're easy, and it's the easiest way to get through the hours that you devoted to studying, but they're the least effective for actually learning. If you want to be effective and efficient in learning, you need to understand the psychology underlying how to learn. And so in general psychology and other courses like cognitive psychology, you learn all the different factors that go into effective learning and studying. You learn the pitfalls that students fall into that undermine their learning effectiveness. You learn the constraints on memorization and learning and remembering that you have to get around. You learn how to get around them. So, for example, I have this video on how to learn in pandemic times. It was designed for remote learning, but it actually is a summary of all the major constraints and all the major pitfalls that students often fall into. And in one video, it kind of talks about how to study effectively. And this is just simply a summary of things that you would learn in a general psychology course or a cognitive psychology course. Now, a second superpower that you develop as a psychology major is how to manage stress and anxiety. Everyone worries about the pervasiveness of stress and anxiety in terms of dealing with different challenges, and this has been especially true during the pandemic. Well, as part of your coursework in psychology, you learn how to cope and deal with stress. Okay, so for example, one popular method is cognitive reappraisal, where you look at stress not as a negative factor, but actually as a normal, helpful resource that gives you energy and gives you focus to do your best. So you reappraise the stress as something that will be helpful to you. So take this TED video, this TED Talk from Dr. Kelly McGonigal, who talks about cognitive reappraisal and how stress can really be helpful to you. And it helps you to cope with stress, and it reduces a lot of the negative impacts of stress. So this video has been widely popular, seen by probably over 30 million people, and it's very valuable, but it's also the same kind of information you would get as part of a health psychology course. You would develop this knowledge simply as part of a course that you might take as a psychology major. So you also learn other factors in helping you to cope with stress and anxiety, increasing your self-efficacy, increasing your resilience, learning how to deal with anxiety and deal with setbacks and to overcome challenges. You develop other coping strategies, you learn the importance of sufficient sleep, of regular exercise. You learn ways that seem to be kind of counterproductive to dealing with stress, like, service to others, which is a very useful way of dealing with stress, expressing gratitude and experiencing awe, taking a walk in nature, allowing yourself to de-stress in that way. So part of your normal coursework in psychology is learning to manage stress and anxiety, something that everyone wants to be able to do, but something that you learn how to do just simply as part of your psychology major. Then a third superpower that you get is learning how to complete a complex task from start to finish. So a lot of psychology major programs involve learning how to conduct research. And if you have that opportunity to do that, then I strongly advise you to do this, because it is taking a very complex abstract task and developing a project around it, a research project around it, and completing that project. It is completing a task from start to finish. So consider all the things that are necessary for conducting an original research project. You have to identify an important problem, a problem that is critical for human behavior, something that has important consequences to solve. Right? Then you have to learn how to look at the existing literature. You learn important information literacy skills. You learn to identify a valid, credible source from misinformation, which is an incredibly valuable skill to have. You learn how to create testable hypotheses, developing testable statements that can be subjected to experimentation. You learn different research designs, the importance of control groups, and how to control extraneous factors. You have to develop IRB approval, you have to obtain an IRB approval, which involves understanding the ethical nature of what it is you're doing, and the ethical consequences of research. Then you have to collect the data, and you have to analyze the data using statistical analyses that are quite marketable and quite useful to know how to do both descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. Then finally, you draw conclusions and implications, you write up a formal report, and you do an oral presentation. You have taken this idea from just an inkling that you had all the way through a formal research and then analysis and then write-up. So if you have the opportunity to do this kind of research, then I strongly encourage you to do this for the experience that you'll gain. And the good news about psychology is that even though some psychological research takes incredibly expensive and complicated equipment like magnetic resonance imaging, you can actually do significant research just with paper and pencil surveys. So that's another superpower that you have. A fourth superpower is that you appreciate how people differ. Right? Now, in this case, you learn about personality and you learn about traits. You learn about the big five, for example. Now, that knowledge is particularly valuable to you. So if you're part of a company, you can use your knowledge of the big five to understand how other employees vary. So if you have a job that requires a lot of attention to detail and a lot of making sure that everything is done exactly right, you pick someone who's high in conscientiousness, right? If you have a job that requires a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, then you get someone who is high in openness, right? If you have a team that has to work well together, that collaborate closely, you pick people who are high in agreeableness, right? If you have an employee who's high in neuroticism, you make sure that you are reassuring to them that they are doing okay. And then if you have a job that requires a lot of interaction with other people, you pick someone who's fairly high in extroversion. So knowing those traits really helps you in terms of making the most of the people that you're working with. And that's just simply one model of the important traits to have. There are many other traits that are important for behavior as well. So Dr. Ken Carter, for example, studies sensation seeking, how some people seek out novel experiences and seek out sort of thrills, whereas others don't, and how that really has important implications for what they do for fun and also the kind of jobs that they seek out. So this is his TED Talk on the importance of understanding sensation seeking. Now, another superpower that you have is you understand and value science. Okay, science is a way of thinking, a way of establishing belief, and science is the most reliable way of establishing belief, the least subject to bias and to errors. Okay, now understanding science is really critical for making good decisions and for understanding what you can and can't conclude from different research. And we've seen the importance of this in the pandemic, where a lot of people didn't understand the science. They didn't understand the difference between an anecdote versus a controlled experiment. They didn't understand the difference between correlation and experimentation. They made the mistake that, of drawing causal inferences from correlation research, something that every psychology major knows that you should avoid doing. Now, you might think that psychological science is no different from other areas of science, but actually you learn more about the nature of science and psychology than you do in other more traditional natural sciences. So here's a graph on the left, which shows the amount of pages in general psychology textbooks devoted to scientific literacy. And you see that psychology far outstrips other more traditional scientific areas. Also, if you look at the amount of time devoted to understanding science, it's larger in psychology, where you spend at least a unit on understanding psychological research and scientific methods. And that's more than you get in a lot of other introductory science courses. There is actually research which shows that general psychology as a general education course teaches students more scientific literacy than other general science courses. And this is incredibly important. As I said, we saw this in the pandemic, being able to evaluate claims. Is this legitimate? Can you legitimately make a causal claim here or not? So Dr. Beth Morning, for example, has this video on the three causal criteria, the three criteria that have to be satisfied before you can actually make a causal claim. Knowing this prevents you from making all sorts of errors that can actually have major consequences in terms of the kind of policies that you establish and the practices that you follow. Then the next superpower that you have is that you know about biases and prejudices. And this has been in the news a lot lately about biases and prejudices affecting our judgment, affecting our behavior. Okay. It's psychologists who study biases and prejudices. So, of course, we know a lot about them. We know about cognitive biases like confirmation bias, where you seek out only information that agrees with your thoughts, and it causes overconfidence. It causes you to overlook contradictory evidence, and knowing about confirmation bias helps prevent that kind of error. It prevents you from falling prey to confirmation bias. Self-serving bias, which causes us to be overconfident in our abilities. Availability bias, just world bias, just world hypothesis. Those are common cognitive biases that you need to be aware of and know how to avoid. There's also social biases, which emerge in groups, which cause people to behave differently as part of a group than they would as individuals. There's conformity bias, displacement responsibility, and diffusion responsibility. Then groupthink and de-individuation. If you're aware of these biases and you're part of a group, it will help you to be wary of them and to avoid them. And then what's also been in the news a lot is implicit biases, biases that govern our behavior that we're not consciously aware of. One of the major researchers in this area is Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt, who wrote a book on how biases affect our behavior and distort our judgment and our perception. And she has a TED Talk on this, which is really valuable to see what psychology has found out about these kinds of biases. Once again, this is incredibly valuable information. It prevents you from making mistakes. It prevents you from making faulty judgments. It's something that other people outside of psychology really want to know, but it's something that you would pick up as part of a social psychology course or maybe a cognitive psychology course. So these are the six superpowers that I think are really obvious in terms of knowledge and skills that you learn in psychology that other students outside of psychology don't learn. But that's not all. There's plenty of other useful stuff that you learn as well. You learn persuasion techniques, for example, getting people to comply with what you want them to do. You learn how to develop better habits, for example, how to identify a bad habit that you have, and how to develop a program to overcome that bad habit. Right. So there's plenty of other superpowers that I don't have time to go into right now. Right. So let's go back and revisit those popular misconceptions about psychology. It's just common sense. I hope by now you see that psychology is much more than common sense. A lot of common sense is actually ineffective and inefficient ways of behaving, and is subject to all sorts of biases. And you learn to do better than common sense when you're a psychology major. We aren't about analyzing people, we're about understanding people and anticipating the kinds of problems that might arise. Then finally, you can't get a job with that major. Well, let's revisit the top 4 skills desired by employers. Remember, critical thinking, teamwork, and collaboration, professionalism and work ethic, and then oral and written communication. Well, critical thinking is composed of learning effectively, of understanding science, which is a form of critical thinking, and knowing about biases and prejudices so that you can avoid them. Those are 3, essential components to critical thinking, and you learn them as psychology majors. Teamwork and collaboration, you appreciate how people differ. You know how to put together a team and lead a team based on how people differ. You know about the biases and prejudices that emerge in a group, and you know how to be aware of them and how to avoid them. Professionalism and work ethic, you know how to complete a complex task, to take it from initial stages all the way to completion, and you know how to manage the stress and anxiety involved in meeting deadlines and delivering the best possible product, under deadline. So, and then finally, oral and written communication. You have information literacy skills you develop as part of learning research skills. You know how to write effectively. You know how to present your research orally and make a good, clear presentation. So actually, you develop important and valuable marketable skills, vocational skills, as part of the psychology major. Of course, you do have to prepare yourself for whatever profession you might go into, but clearly the psychology major provides you with really valuable employable skills. Now, I have to say, though, with great power comes great responsibility. We have these superpowers as psychology majors, but we have to remain humble in how we display that information. So if someone says, we use only 10% of our brain, you know that is a common myth, but you explain it to them in a very gentle, persuasive way that the research shows that and other myths like you're left-brained or right-brained are simply misconceptions and myths that people have. People might say that, schizophrenia, that means having multiple personalities. You know better than that as a psychology major, but you have to explain this to them in a way that is constructive and is useful for them. And then when people think that the Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram are valid personality assessments, you avoid slapping your head and you just explain to them how there are better, more valid, more standardized tests out there. Okay, so that's the superpowers of psychology majors. And the truth about the psychology major is that it's much more than common sense. You learn how to understand people, and you develop valuable job skills. The bottom line is this: whether when you major in psychology, whether you stay in psychology, or you tackle other career goals, whatever you do, psychological science is going to help you. It's going to provide you skills that are going to help you to succeed and to thrive both in college and in whatever career that you might pursue. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you the best in pursuing your psychology goals.